Program Bachelors of Arts 3rd year, Subject Psychology, Semester 5, Course Code PSD 101, Course Title Statistics for Psychology. Title of the Unit, Unit 3, Normal Probability Curve. Module Name, Testing Significance of Difference Between Two Means, Calculation of Z-Test Part 1. I, Miss Vidya Balikai, Assistant Professor, working at Government College of Arts, Science, Commerce, Khandala, Marshall, Ponda. Outline of the lecture. What is Z-Test? Calculation of Z-Test formulas. Learning outcomes. Know what is Z-Test all about. Understand the difference method of calculating Z-Test. Here in this, we will be determining the significance of difference between two means. So under that, there are total 4 cases. First case, large but independent sample. That means when a sample size is more than 30, that includes larger sample size. So case 3 includes small but independent sample. Small means wherein it includes a sample less than 30. Case 3, large but correlated sample. Case 4, small but correlated sample. For large sample, we will be doing Z-test, and for small sample, we will be doing T-test. So, the first case, significance of difference between two means for large but independent samples. So, the formula here stands standard error. SE stands for standard error deviation. So, there is a formula here which includes the whole root. Here, students, please make note, the root is whole, it covers the entire formula. So, root standard deviation, mean of first raised to square plus standard deviation, mean of second sample. So, standard deviation mean 1 means standard error of the means of the first sample. Standard deviation M2 means standard error of the mean of second sample. So, the formula gets splitted again. Standard mean. How to calculate standard mean? Standard mean, standard error of the first sample and the size of the first sample, that is n. And in the same way, standard error of second sample is calculated as standard error of second sample upon the total size of the sample, n. So, continuation, the formula stands here and it got reduced again, and at step 2, we calculate Z-test. So, that is Z-test formula is here. Z is equal to M1 minus M2. M1 means mean of first sample and mean of second sample upon standard deviation. So, here we calculate the difference between the mean of two samples upon standard error of difference between the means. For example, two-tailed test. Two-tailed means it's stating you as there is a difference between the two variables. Now here we will take an example. A science teacher wanted to know the relative effectiveness of lecture cum demonstration method over traditional lecture method. So, he divides the class into equal random group, that is group A and group B. Taught group A by lecture cum demonstration method and taught group B by lecture method. After teaching for 3 months, he administered an achievement test to both the groups to know whether there exists any difference between the two groups. So, the data collected here and it's put in a tabular form. So, mean of the first group is 43, mean of group B is 30, standard deviation is 8 for group A, 7 for group B, number of students for group A is 65 and for group B is 65. So, here sample size is same. So, we will know how to go about in calculation by putting these values in a formula. So, solution here, the teacher has first to establish a null hypothesis. What is null hypothesis? Null hypothesis states that there will be no significance difference between two teaching methods. That is, there exists no real difference between the means of two samples. This hypothesis then will be tested in the following way. The difference between the mean is calculated first, that's M1, that's a mean of first group, that is 43, minus the mean of second group is 30, which gives you 13. Then standard error of difference between the mean is calculated with the formula of standard error method. So standard error method is equal to whole root standard deviation of group 1 and standard deviation of group 2. Then it is reduced again with the formula. So the standard deviation of group 1 is 8, that's raised to square, which means 8 by 8 upon 65. N1 is sample size, that is 65, plus 7 into 7 upon 65. So 8 into 8 gives you 64 plus 49 upon 65. Now denominator value is common, so it's taken as 1. Okay, so we should not go for cross calculation here because the denominator is common. So then we should solve the bracket first and then reduce the root value. So you should never reduce the root value first. So reduce all the values, then leave the root value at the end. Then you get 1.32 as your standard error calculation, okay, value. Continuation. Then after getting standard error and the mean difference, we then calculate z-test. The formula for z-test is mean M1, that's a mean of first group, minus M2, that's a mean of second group, upon standard deviation. So standard error deviation, the value which we got in a previous slide, that's 1.32. So 13 upon 1.32. So your calculated value comes to 9.85. So then now we will evaluate whether to reject or accept the null hypothesis. Now we need to know this calculated value, and then the critical value is taken at 5% level of significance is 1.96, and for 1% level of significance is 2.56. So our calculated value, which is 9.85, is greater than the critical value. So we reject null hypothesis and accept the alternate hypothesis at 5% and 1% level of significance. So our calculated value is 9.85, which is far greater than the critical value at 5% and 1% level of significance. So we reject null hypothesis, which states that there will be no difference between the two methods of teaching. So thus we may safely conclude that the difference between the means of two samples cannot be attributed to a chance factor, because this difference is quite trustworthy and dependable to say that the lecture cum demonstration method is more effective as a method of teaching than the traditional teaching method. So there's an extra problem for you all to solve. So kindly make notes, students, and references for the same is Mangal and Garrett. And thank you, students.